Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. We're very pleased to have with us Alexandra York. Alexandra is the founding president of American Renaissance for 21st Century Art, regular columnist for Newsmax, author of several books, most recently Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks, and also an Ayn Rand fan. Alexandra, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Great. Well, can you give us a little bit about your background, how you found Ayn Rand?
Yes, I was old when I found Ayn Rand. I was 25, and even though I had philosophy courses in college, her name never came up, and I'm sure that's not a surprise. But my brother was in college at that time. I was in New York, and he sent me the book. And on the phone, he said, "You'll like this," meaning he did not. And I was starring in an off-Broadway musical, and I was getting laryngitis. So the doctor said, "You must rest, and you've got to sleep, you've got to rest." So I went to bed at 10:30 and picked up that book. I had no idea what it was, except my brother didn't like it, and he thought I would. And it was The Fountainhead. That was at 10:30. At 5:30 in the morning, I put the book down. I was finished. And I said, "Well, finally, somebody agrees with me."
Wow, you read it really quickly.
Yes, I did. But it was, there was no epiphany for me as there is with so many others, because I was an Aristotle girl from the time I was 17. So I was very versed and developed so that when I read objectivism, it was more of a confirmation of what I already knew and lived every day of my life. So it was a wonderful thing. And then, of course, then I went on to read all the rest of the books. We the Living is my favorite.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I love We the Living. It's a great book.
Yeah. So that was how I got introduced.
Yeah, let me ask you, you said you're an Aristotle girl, and that came through very clearly in your new book. So I was wondering, was there anything in Ayn Rand that you found interesting or unique and have applied in your life?
The biggest influence she had on me was in my writing, because the concept of romantic realism struck me. The bells were ringing everywhere. And I wrote my first novel, not because I wanted to be a fiction writer, but back in the 1970s, which seems like 100 years ago, there really were not good roles for young women. So I decided I'm going to do a TV show with a woman lawyer who's brainy, because law was my second choice for career. Thank goodness I didn't do it, because I love justice too much. But anyway, I started this pilot for a TV show, and I said, in which I would star, of course. And that became Adamus, by the way, the novel. And I said, too many people are going to get their finger in my creative pie this way. I'm going to write it as a film, and then we'll spin it off into a TV episode. And then I said, well, too many people are going to get their finger in my pie again. I think I'll write it as a novel, then we'll spin it off into a movie. Meanwhile, all the time, I'm trying to get a decent role for myself on television. So I started writing the novel. And that's when what I learned from her about fiction writing really came into play. I never intended to become a fiction writer, but once I wrote that novel, I was hooked. I love writing fiction because I'm God. I can do anything I want. Yesterday, I changed a character around, and it's really, really fun. And the thing that she taught me was that I can write about ideas, but don't, like the 19th century romanticism, you don't have to put them in history or some exotic environment. You could write about current burning issues of the day in a romantic fiction format. And that's what really, that was her biggest influence on me. And that's what the way I write all my fiction.
That's really amazing because, Ayn Rand says that she knew she was going to be a fiction writer since she was a child, and then you came to it later in life. So that just proves that anyone can take on fiction writing. And even Leonard Peikoff, he started writing his short stories after his retirement. So it's,
Well, I actually started at age 5 because
wow.
I was writing plays, and then I would get all the neighborhood kids together and they would all get their parts. And of course, I was always the star. And so I was writing fiction really my whole life. I started writing professionally nonfiction when I was 18 and still in college. And then when I went to New York, I was really not cut out to be a starving actress. So my first jobs were writing for CBS network radio, and then I wrote for Cunningham and Walsh Advertising. So until I established my performing career, I was writing professionally that whole time. And I never stopped writing nonfiction, but it was the fiction that she got me into. Very interesting.
Fascinating. Any observations about the movement over the years, even the just broader liberty movement?
As it pertains to objectivism specifically, are you asking?
Yeah.
Well, yes. I think the saddest part of it is all of the personalities in conflict.
The schisms.
Yes, and I really think that has been the single most important impediment to getting the philosophy out to a broader audience. I think it could have had more impact if those personalities had not been so strong against each other. Heaven knows objectivism is so important that we all should be pulling together, I think.
I agree fully.
Yeah, I would like to see both sides join together in a sort of debate conference and hash out their issues in a civil manner. I think that there's too much that they agree on in the fundamentals that that should not prevent them from getting together and bringing together everybody in all the different factions.
It's really true. I gave a lecture, which is where the spirituality subject actually came up for, I can't remember what it's called then, they changed their name so many times, but it's the Atlas Society now, David Kelly's group. And we can get back to that because that is really where the spirituality business began. But I lectured and gave workshops for them. And then later on, ARI did 18 hours of oral history with me. So I've been involved with both organizations. And I think that that's the way it should be.
Yeah, ideally. Well, I'm jumping around, but just because you do fiction and nonfiction writing. I mean, and obviously I can hear your passion for fiction writing, but how do you switch from one to another?
I write about ideas, and I always have. So it depends on what ideas I want to explore. And then I decide which form will be the most persuasive, will be the most understandable. For example, when I wrote From the Fountainhead to the Future and other essays on art and excellence, that was a compilation of what was considered to be my best essays in the 90s. So that became a nonfiction. And I have other nonfictions that I have written. So it depends upon my subject. Now, the novels are more fun because I get to not only present my ideas, the themes, but I get to create characters, which I love to do. I get to create environments. I get to design houses. I can do anything I want with fiction. And I spend a lot of time developing my characters and naming them, and then putting them all in a place where I can then weave my theme through the plot. I mean, it's much more difficult and it's a whole lot more fun.
Yeah, you sent me an interview to watch, and you were talking about your love for creating your characters, and I was curious about how like attached you get to your characters, because you only write one-off novels. I think you said you don't write series of stories because you want to keep creating different characters. But for me, when I think of, I have this idea for a series of novels, and it involves one character in like a trilogy, because I fall in love with the character so much, I want to write more and more about him. Do you feel any of that, or are you easily, can you easily let the character go and then move on?
I gladly let the character go because I'm finished. They have already served my purpose. And for series writings, it wouldn't be interesting to me. It's a valid form, heaven knows. But for me, I have to create and want to create new characters, because for each novel, my theme is different, my plot is different. So I have to develop characters that will serve my plot in order to consummate my theme. So the development of characters is like the development of scenes. I mean, everything has to serve my theme. And I enjoy creating new people. And when I'm finished, then they have served their purpose and they go on and have a life of their own, and I go on and write another book.
So you wrote this nonfiction book recently, Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book and what you hope readers will get from it.
I'd be delighted to, because so many people do not understand that there is such a thing as secular spirituality. Sorry, someone will get that phone. Objectivists in particular, or everybody really, they assume that a spiritual experience must be mystical, having to do with religion. And the books that have been written in the past on secular spirituality, in my view, have absolutely nothing to do with spirituality. They have to do with deep breathing, meditation, trance sort of things, which can be very quieting to the mind, but they have nothing to do with values. And my thesis is that secular spirituality has everything to do with values. Now, the other reason, and I did have objectivists very much in mind when I wrote this book, because as I told you, the whole thing started back in the 90s when I gave this speech to the now called Atlas Society up at the University of British Columbia. And my theme for that speech was art as spiritual experience. Now, I had already written an essay in my Art Foundation's magazine, which was called Art Ideas. I had already written an essay called Art as Spiritual Experience. So that was my speech for that convention. Then I gave a workshop, and they were all objectivists. And it was very clear to me that, number one, they had no idea that a spiritual experience was available to them, because number one, they tied it to mysticism or religion. And number two, they didn't seem to be able to grasp, and it could well have been my fault because I wasn't completely developed in my theory at that point. they also didn't understand the difference between normal emotional experiences and secular spiritual experiences, which are not only emotional, in my view, they are emotional and physical, psychosomatic. You experience secular spirituality via nature, art, and a romantic beloved person, but it's not just emotional. It's the whole body is involved. So it's a mind-body integrated experience. And it is so much more powerful, so much more empowering and heightened an experience, which makes it spiritual rather than normal emotionality. So later on, I got to thinking about that. And I thought, now, those are the two stumbling blocks. They relate it to religion, or they think it's just plain emotional. So that's when I really got to thinking, now how can I broaden this so that it's understandable that secular spiritual experiences have absolutely to do with your values. And so what you need to do, and I learned this from studying religion, because every religion, if you stop to think about it, and I did enormous research into religions when I was in high school, every single religion has some methodology where you connect to an other. That other could be God, it could be a deified prophet, it could be a saint, but you're connecting with some other. So I said, no, wait a minute. If you're doing it on a secular realm, what is it you need to connect to? Well, what you need to connect to is some other. And in my thesis, that's, as I said, nature, art, or a romantic beloved person who embodies your most fundamental animating values. So you still, in a secular spirituality, you still connect to another. And my book is all about if you read it, William, it's all about methodologies, like a religion has rituals or whatever.
Yeah, I think you talk about spiritual snacks, and you give instructions on how to develop your spirituality and experience these celebrations. And some of those suggestions remind me of like a ritual. It's kind of like a secular ritual where you go out and you talk about doing something with your significant other, and like going on dates and cuddling together and watching a movie or something like that. So these are kind of practices that you can use to create the habit of spirituality.
Yes, I give methodologies in each area, nature, art, for example, a methodology to learn about how and train yourself to be receptive to secular spiritual experiences. I suggest going to a museum and no phones, and go alone, no preconceptions, and just wander. Your soul already knows. So you just trust yourself, wander, and all of a sudden you will find a painting or a piece of sculpture where you just stop and, this is it. And you're just mesmerized. And that's that feeling of wonder, of ecstasy, of rapture, because what you're seeing is your own values embodied in a work of art. So you're seeing yourself in an outside form. And of course, what is a romantic beloved person? The person, if we're rational, the person we fall in love with is the living, breathing, scowling, smiling embodiment in a living human being. So there are values in another human being. So we love that human being because, as Aristotle says, we love ourselves. It's very important to love ourselves. And the only way we can love ourselves fully in a mind-body integrated experience is to connect with a work of art that embodies our values, a person who embodies our values, and nature, of course, is always there for us to slip up into a cloud and just let yourself float with that cloud and immerse yourself in nature. And when you come back from an experience like that, you feel as if you've touched eternity, because the universe is eternal. So when you let yourself, and everybody has to find out what it is for themselves. Some people are water people, some people are earth people, some people are sky people. And I give examples in the book of how you can learn about yourself, methodologies to experiment with. And many of these, of course, are what I call soul celebrations. These are full-blown time stops. Nothing exists but this wondrous, rapturous feeling of oneness with whatever you're connecting with. And those are biggies. And then as William, you said, I give little spiritual snacks that you can just, you can, for example, YouTube is great on that. You can go to YouTube and plug in one of your favorite composers and listen to a sonata. And that's just a small one, but boy, can that refresh and renew your spirit for the day.
Right. Yeah. And in your book, you said you're a mountain and sky person. And I can relate because I'm a mountain person. I'm always up in the mountains doing something, doing trail work or going on a hike or just spending the night in the mountains. And one of my favorite things to do is just sit by the river and listen to the stream and look around and just pretend like I'm part of the mountain, you know.
But you're not pretending, you're actually doing it. I'm looking at Vermont mountains out my window right now. And this past weekend, my husband and I walked into the woods, our own woods, and by the waterfall and the streams, we had a little picnic together. So we were combining romantic love and nature in the mountains, as it were. So you're already there.
Yeah.
It sounds like at least part of the message is saying that, you know, even to objectivists, that if someone, you know, if a Christian or religious person is telling you about a mystical experience, what they're describing may not actually be mystical, but it's that combination of, you know, experience and just eudaimonia that you were talking about, and that we don't have to shun them.
No, I don't think we have to shun them. Absolutely not. But I do think there's an enormous difference between religious experience and secular spirituality, because the methodology is so different, and you are connecting with something that, in our view, does not exist. Whereas my secular spirituality thesis has you connect with something real here on this earth now. So it's much more powerful. I sort of think of it that perhaps religious people, they use this word all the time, they transcend themselves. They transcend. Well, my theory is that you don't transcend yourself, you embrace yourself. So it's a real celebration of self, not a celebration of connecting with some ephemeral entity. So I think there's a real big difference. And I have religious, for this book, I always have a few beta readers, but for this book, I literally had 12 beta readers because I had a very sophisticated Jewish woman, I had a devout Christian, I had an atheist, I had mixed, because I wanted to get reactions from all these different people who had different persuasions already. And every single one of them adopted my theory of secular spirituality. The religious people did in addition to their mystical experiences, and the non-religious people adopted. And when I say adopt, I don't mean swallow whole, because once anybody learns the methodology, and that's why I have 3 blank pages at the end of every chapter, because once you learn the methodology, you no longer need me. You will then find your own way to your own special, like you do, William, the mountains, you already know that. But many people need to have a little education in how to manage those connections. And there's one other thing, and that a lot of people who, and this is my own observation, many people who live by reason alone are often emotionally repressed. So they're afraid of their emotions because they're afraid if they feel too much that they are denying reason. And of course, that's not true, but it does exist in some people. I have met enough of them so that I was able to identify it. And once they understand that reason and emotion can exist together and in harmony, boy, that opens up doors like mad.
Yeah, you talk a lot about your message being for both the religious and the secular. And I think that's great. I think that's what we need, is we need to be able to connect both types of people who are people of faith and people who are people of reason. But what I struggle with is how do you get them to be more like the secular and less like the religious? Or is that even something I should be concerned about? Like, for example, I have a friend, a Christian friend, and we talk each week to each other on the phone, and we discuss the book of Luke. And of course, I'm an atheist, and he knows that. But anytime we get to like a fundamental understanding about the message of Jesus, and even if we agree that it's a good message, we'll then debate whether it's the word of God, or if it's good because God pronounced it in the Bible, or if it's good because it comes up from human nature. And I can't get past his devotion or faith to the idea that there's this God out there and he dispenses the truth. So how do you make a connection there when there's that sort of divide between people?
I'm not trying to sell a book, but why don't you give him my book?
Maybe I will.
I'm serious about it, because once in every case that I have, and I'm talking about book signings and dealing with people I don't know, for example, at a book signing, once they read the book, they, at least the ones I have met, including my beta readers, they embrace it as an additional type of experience. They don't need to neglect or reject their religion, but this is something extra. It's a different thing. And they can have both kinds of experiences. And I have not, the trouble is it's hard to talk about these things like you and your friend. It's hard to explain it. But if you have something like my book to relate to, you can say, well, let's talk about this chapter. And in my experience, I've had so many people tell me that even though they are religious, they find that this is an addition to their life, not a conflict. So that might be, maybe that would be delightful to me, to know that my thesis can add to everybody's life, people who are religious and people who are not. And that seems so far to be my experience. I have not had any religious people dislike or feel a conflict with it. In fact, one person said to me, "Oh, for heaven's sakes, I've been having spiritual snacks all my life. I just didn't know it."
Yeah, it seems like you're systematizing this process of spirituality. And, a lot of people, even religious people, you can tell that they are more interested in secular activities and, getting their euphoric experience from, skiing or watching football on Sunday instead of going to church. So, what I think your book is doing is it's an attempt to systematize this process of heightening your spirituality. So I kind of like that.
That's true, but going to skiing, I deal with this in the book. You may have noticed. I go out of my way to point out that sports, and I'm an athlete myself, it's not spiritual, because there's paraphernalia involved, there's skill involved, and it certainly can be euphoric, but you are not having a mind-body connection with a real entity. You're in nature, but you're using nature, you're enjoying nature, but you're not immersed in it because you're busy watching somebody else, or you are then yourself in nature. So the spiritual part of it requires a oneness, which is not the same as the joy of efficacy in nature. It's a merging, it's an immersing oneness. You feel, as I think you do with the mountains, you feel that you are complete because you're experiencing yourself in another physical form.
Well, when I go hiking or trail running in the mountains, you can get into a zone, and you kind of feel like you're in the present moment and nothing else matters but you and the mountains, and the way you take the turns on the trail or something like that. You feel like you are part of that system of the mountains and the trails and everything. So I'm curious, you talk about levels of spirituality. Could there be a lower level where, skiing or hiking or trail running or biking, that's like a lower level of spirituality?
That's an interesting way to put it. Offhand, it sounds right to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like that idea, like degrees of spirituality, like your normal state, like going to work or eating breakfast. These are normal routines you have. And that's like the base layer, base level of spirituality. You're kind of.
I don't think you can go that low.
No.
No, I think it has to be an immersion with a physical entity. You don't feel at one with your cereal. So it has to.
I don't know. Sometimes my cereal is pretty tasty.
No, I think that your comment about being in nature is the easiest, of course, because it doesn't involve any will on the part of nature. Nature just is. But the hierarchy of spirituality, nature is the easiest because it just is. And then art is the next highest, because every very good work of art, every valid work of art is an expression of the values of the artist. And if your values match the values of the artist, then you will experience that work of art in a highly spiritual manner. And then the top, absolute top, because my theory is mind-body integration. So the top spiritual experience would be that with a romantic, beloved person, because you not only have a living embodiment of values, but you have sexual union as well. So that is the absolute summit of mind-body connection. So there is a hierarchy too.
Yeah, and in the art section, you talk about a lot of classical music and operas that you like. I happen to be like a hard rock fan, and you said something about hard rock can't stimulate a spiritual experience. I think I
That
would
doesn't mean
probably,
that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it,
yeah, well, I
but it
certainly
does.
enjoy it.
Sure, but
But
that
let me ask
doesn't.
you about like rock. You've heard of like rock operas where rock bands try to have like a concept album, or
Right.
the Who actually turned it into a play, a musical. Do you think something like that, where you can incorporate rock with a more artistic type of music, is that possible to create a spiritual experience?
I don't think so, because the musical form of rock, by its nature, uh, activates the limbic system of the brain. Functional imaging proves all this, and that controls kinetic, which is body movement, and sex, the lower. I don't want to call them instincts, but yes, they are. And it doesn't involve the neocortex, which is where your values are. So I don't think that that can be spiritual. It doesn't mean it can't be fun and enjoyable and take your attention and give great, great pleasure. But that's the big difference between an emotional experience and a spiritual one, because the spiritual one has to involve your own values. And of course, many people don't have a conscious hierarchy of their values. And if you remember, I think it's chapter 8, I have little exercises you can do to find out. Many people don't know how to introspect. So you can use my little exercises to identify your values consciously, put them in hierarchical order, and then you need to identify what I call your animating principle. And think the Italian word anima means soul. So you can identify your animating principle by narrowing every single thing down to one word. And you may recall I have that little exercise in the book. If you had to identify yourself with one single word, what would it be? Now, for my own self, my animating principle that informs every other value I own is truth. Now, my husband's animating principle is independence. All of his other values stem and flow from that fountainhead. I have another person who their animating principle is relentlessness. Another one is curiosity. Another one is fortitude. So if you identify your primary animating value, that helps guide you into spiritual experiences. So I think that identifying it, look, we all know that unless you can conceptualize something, you will never own it. Just like the person who said, I've been having spiritual snacks all my life, but I didn't know it. Well, he didn't know it because he didn't own the concept of it. And once he understood what they were, then he could enjoy them in a much more full-blown fashion because his subconscious knew what he was doing.
Yeah, I think if I were to think about it more, I might come up with a better word. But right now, I think my animating principle is probably growth. Like, I think of intellectual growth. I'm always interested in learning new things, and I build things in the mountains. So I basically want to keep growing.
I love it. Why not?
And I've actually thought about this quite a bit, because when you look at plants or any animals, they're going through a growth process, and then when they stop growing, they die. So if I just want to keep growing so I don't die, that's
That's good. That's good immortality.
Well, I'm a rock fan too, but I do want to switch gears here because I think you have also written some great nonfiction in Newsmax that I just wanted to make sure to highlight before while we still have time. You had a piece on the real meaning of cancel culture. And what I saw as your thesis was great, that the real purpose of cancel culture is to obliterate the fundamental values of advanced civilization, liberty, individualism, and reason. And because of America's prominence to accomplish that global goal, this country's entire culture of individualism must be destroyed first, meaning everything from language to eating habits. And
Absolutely.
I just think that's such a great summary of where we're at. You also say in that article that self-muzzling individuals who swallow the poison pill of political correctness make the canceler's job even easier. And I was thinking about that, and would you say that's related to what Ayn Rand called the sanction of the victim?
Hmm. I think
Because they're
I
going
do.
along with it by self-censoring.
Yeah, I think I do. That's a very good thought to come up with. I didn't think of it that way, but I see the sense of it because they are, in essence, enabling other people to hurt them.
Yeah.
So they are in fact the victim, and this is why people must, if this country is to be saved, we are in an ideational war, civil war. There is no doubt about that. And if people who let themselves be muzzled, we are going to lose. The only way to save this country is for people like us and other people, religious people who have basically good societal values. If we don't stand up, if parents don't stand up against school boards, if people don't go to their town hall meetings and speak up, then the other side, the irrational side, the elites, the power hungry people will win. Because in the end, it will be ideas that win. It's always been that way.
And they're pushing theirs.
Oh, yes, indeed. And the more people keep quiet, that's a good identification, Scott. I like that.
Thank you. Well, then I'll just go through these. You had another
Scott,
piece.
I have a point
Go ahead.
about that. So in your cancel culture article, you also made a comparison with the woke left to communists and Nazis. You said that like the communists who are for a workers' paradise and the Nazis who are for an Aryan paradise, the woke left is for an equity for all utopia. And I thought that was a brilliant conceptualization of their purpose. Is there therefore this crazy idea that everyone's equal? And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you came up with that comparison, that analogy to the communists and the fascists.
Well, because they are all selling a utopia. And I think I pointed out in that article, if I recall correctly, that utopia came about from Thomas More. And he was the first one who coined the term. And it comes from the Greek utopos, which means no place. And they combined it with utopos, which means a good place. So utopia actually means that a good place is nowhere. And every single collectivist who of any stripe, it doesn't matter their political identification, they all are selling utopia in one way or another. The communists are selling the workers utopia, and the fascists are selling a different kind of utopia, but they're all non-existent. So people identify with some sort of utopia, and that they're willing to fight for it, but the people who propagate those different utopias know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah,
It's a
I think,
weird,
go ahead.
oh yeah, just another observation is that when you put forth this idea of a utopia, I think it can be based in reality or it can be based in fantasy. And I think the problem with the woke leftists is that their utopia is based in fantasy. People are not equal, and you can't have an equal society unless you get rid of everyone who isn't equal. And so how are you going to get rid of everyone who isn't equal? You gotta,
By destroying individualism.
right.
Every time you hear them, it's all about a group. This group, that group, female, sexual preference, age, heaven knows, they victimize all these groups, color, whatever it may be. And then that group sees itself as part of a whole rather than individualism, which means we can choose to associate or identify with whomever we wish. But at root, we are a separate individual. And if you champion individualism, you champion everybody. Once you group people, they are bound to be against each other. It's human nature.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah, this other piece where I was really impressed to see Ayn Rand be so prominently mentioned. It's called "It's Not Right versus Left; It's Right versus Wrong." And you say in there, the answer has been codified by a 20th century American philosopher who expanded Aristotle's identification of reason as the human tool of survival to include a methodology as to how individuals can chart their own personal paths to happiness and fulfillment, and at the same time get along socially, politically, morally, in a respectful, peaceable manner. That philosopher is Russian-born novelist Ayn Rand.
And I know, I snuck that in. Wasn't that clever?
That's great. I'm curious what kind of feedback you get when you mention her, especially in a somewhat conservative publication.
Silence.
Okay.
They let me do, Chris Ruddy himself invited me to have a column. He had read my lying essay and was impressed with that. And he said, you can write anything you want. And my editors like my stuff because it's they call it evergreen because it's timeless. I don't stick on something that doesn't have a broader meaning, broader application. So in fact, there's an 800 word limit on articles, and I keep it under 1,000. I have never gone over 1,000, but they let me go up into the 900s. And so they pretty much let me do what I want. But I'm glad you picked that up because I thought that was pretty clever of me to sneak that in.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Well,
and what
you
I
go
say
on to say if both sides adopted it, peace would prevail. And
Yep.
I do think that's a nice sentiment, even if I'm not sure if far left wokies want peace.
Well, that's true, but I at least offer the possibility. And you'll notice in that article, I go out of my way because I know how people respond to Ayn Rand. Some people just hear the name and they go ballistic. So I go out of my way in that article also to say one may disagree with other aspects of the philosophy, but
Right.
if we all agree with the base of it, which is you can do anything else in this world that you want as long as you do not infringe upon the rights of another person. That's the base of it. And if you could just get that far, then peace would prevail. But I go out of my way to say you don't have to agree with everything because that lets people have an avenue to ponder the base of the philosophy without getting lost in all the things they disagree with.
Absolutely. I think this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. People get so caught up in that. And you may have religious people that are maybe moving away from their faith. They're getting into Ayn Rand or they're libertarian or something, but they hear from the Orthodox objectivists, oh, sorry, we don't, you can't be an objectivist if you believe in God. And that's, I mean, I understand that, but it's just the wrong spirit and the wrong message versus, hey, let's forget about these disagreements, like you're saying, but if you can agree on individual rights, we can work together.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I also, I don't think that they are mutually exclusive. I think that you can live the philosophy and still have faith, but separate them. I mean, all of the tenets of religions are all bad. So if one could offer, as I like to do, the philosophy, but without threatening anybody who is of faith. And I went out of my way in my spirituality book to make sure that that was clear, because many people of faith feel that if they follow reason in other areas, they're betraying their faith. Just like many objectivists feel that if they have faith, that they are betraying reason. Well,
Right.
fundamentally they are, but I don't think that it's useful or productive to pit one against the other. In my book, I try to embrace everybody so that no one is threatened but can partake of what I have to offer and enrich their lives. It doesn't do any good to pit people against each other when, in fact, we have much in common.
I think
That's the
that
spirit.
your article gets at the civil war of ideas, which is obviously something objectivists are very interested in. And from a long range perspective, we do want to argue for the right ideas and try to inject them into the culture in order to change the culture. But what I'm interested in, and I think what Scott is interested in as well, is how do we integrate that with a short range perspective of the current political situation and how to deal with the political battle right now. For example, I think the left is just, we can't work with them. They are socialists and we don't have anything in fundamental agreement with them. But I see some agreement on the right and even some attention they're giving to Rand's ideas. And so I think there's an opportunity to work with the right against the left. Do you agree that in the short range perspective, we should adopt an alliance with the right against the left?
I do. I absolutely do. If you were in a foxhole, who would you rather be with? A Christian or an elite?
Maniac?
I mean, I like the idea that you're saying short term, because in the long term, we need philosophy. But it's a long road to get there. I mean, think of when Aristotle was alive, and then think that his ideas really never came to full fruition until the Enlightenment. We're talking the 18th century, and he's from 300 BC. So look how long it took Aristotle's fundamental ideas to blossom and, in fact, bear fruit by the birth of the United States of America. So philosophy is going to take a long time. And we need to work with where we have things in common with people, like individual rights, like true education, like liberty is the most important one, and reason. Even if some people compartmentalize their religion in one box and reason in another box. We can work with the box that it coincides with ours.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only stumbling block I see is the abortion issue. That's like the main issue.
Yeah,
And it's very hard to convince a religious conservative about rights and when they start and whether a fetus has rights. So, but if we can kind of put that to the side for now, we can get rid of the left, then we can focus on debating with the right, I think.
I think you're right. And I do think that the abortion issue is the big stumbling block. That's a toughie. But I try to point out, and I think it's the one you mentioned, Scott, it's not right versus left, but right versus wrong. I go ahead and I deal with abortion there. And I did it on purpose because I know that my readership there is going to be largely religious individuals. So I wanted to broach the subject head on and not shy away from it. So I did bring up the abortion issue and try to explain why it should be an individual decision in a very gentle way. And I did it by juxtaposing the left, because the left, of course, wants victimization of everybody. They want power. So I dealt with that head on, and I knew I was dealing with a real hot button. But I went ahead and did it because and if you remember, I did it quite gently. I was trying to encourage religious people to at least know that that door could be cracked open a bit for them.
I think that's
like
the right approach.
like bringing up Ayn Rand. I try to sneak in things once in a while that I think will, but I do it in such a way that I don't threaten anybody, and I just try to open a door so that they can see that there might be another room.
Well, this has been great. Any upcoming projects you've got in the works?
Yes, I'm finally getting to what I call my East meets West novel. And it's been brewing for so long. And it will be my atlas. It's my big statement, my biggest statement. Cross Points it's a very philosophical novel. The other two are very firmly idea-based, but they are narrower. But this one is going to be a very big one, and it's being written. It's driving me crazy because I've had so much else going on in my life that over the past years that it's been brewing, that instead of outlining, I mean, I have the beginning and I have the end written, of course, and I have many chapters written that are not in order. I know that something's going to happen, but I don't know when. So I'm writing that chapter like yesterday, and the way Cross Points is revolving all around the visual arts. This novel revolves all around music. So I'm able to write about music, which I love to do. And I'm a car buff and own classic cars. So One of my characters gets to race antique cars because I have them, and I take my XK120 1954 Jag, and she's in the novel. So, and I've done Japanese tea. I've studied in New York and Kyoto for a couple of decades, where, I wear a kimono, I get down and with my whisk and make tea. So my lead character is a Japanese Hawaiian American violinist, and my hero is a mad romantic composer. So I call it my East meets West novel. And it revolves all around music. But but it's being written in a very strange way because it seems sometimes incoherent to me because I'm doing research at the same time I'm writing chapters and developing new characters. So it's a mishmash mess, but I am finally getting back to it. And I've just given in to the process because I have to embrace chaos to write this one.
Sounds like it's similar to the way music can hit people, in a mysterious, confused emotional way.
Well, it's also all about music. And
Yeah.
of course, music is one of the highest spiritual experiences that one can have. So music is my weakest. I'm very facile in all of the arts, but I started ballet at 3, piano at 5, drama at 7. So I've been immersed in the arts all my life. But, and I was trained in opera and I sang professionally, of course, in musicals, but theoretically, it's my weakest department. So I'm having to do, and I'm enjoying it very much, doing a lot of theoretical work in the area of music.
Well, that is fascinating. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe we'll have you back for the next book when it's ready. William, any final thoughts?
Just a big thank you, Alexandra, for coming on the program. It was a true pleasure talking to you. I love art. I love music. I love thinking about it and creating systems and theories about it. So it was a true pleasure reading your book. And I am going to buy Cross Points because it sounds like an excellent novel. And I look forward to your next novel. So thank you again. And I hope to talk to you again.
It's my pleasure to have talked to both of you. And I really do suggest, and please let me know the outcome, if you manage to get your friend to read Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks, that could be an avenue for conversation between the two of you. It could be the catalyst that could help you talk about things in a very productive way. If it worked, do please let me know, because that would give me the greatest pleasure in the world.
I will let you know, and I will give him the book, and I'll use the fact that we're discussing Luke to convince him that he should read your book because, tit for tat,
Well, it also gives you something concrete to refer to.
Right.
When I got responses from readers from Crosspoints, it was something that never occurred to me when I was writing the book at all. But I got many, many letters from mothers across the country thanking me for that novel because they said we used it because it deals with love and sex, of course. And they said, I mean, too many women wrote to me not to be very pleased at this. They said it gave that novel, once I read it, I then read it with my daughter, teenage daughter, college daughter, and that book gave me a chance to talk about love and sex in a good manner with my daughter. So they used it as a vehicle. And my Soul Celebrations and Spiritual Snacks, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that might be a vehicle people could use to have that commonality to refer to when they're having discussions. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Good.
And you even provide pages in the back for people to take notes. So that's great.
That's what they're there for, because as you know, once you start identifying and having these blowout, rapturous, time-stopping, heart-throbbing moments, you're going to come up with many more. I only point the way. Once people understand how to do it, they're going to come up with their own.
That's good stuff. I want to thank you. Hopefully William will bring that up with his friend. And we want to thank you so much for joining us, Alexandra. I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you next time.